come on, Doctor. It's an airship. Nothing bad has ever happened on an airship. Big finish Doctor Who time, and this time I took a listen to the very first adventure of Paul McGann, back as the 8th Doctor after his inauspicious debut in the TV movie. Not his fault. He was actually really good, even in that not very good thing. But this was finally his return as a performer. You know, the 8th Doctor had been used in other ancillary media, novels, comics, what have you, but this was the return of Paul McGann in the part. I was excited to listen to this, and it was really great to have him back in this. So before I get too much into it, let's talk setup, and I'll go spoiler free for as long as I can on this. There's really only one or two spoilers things I kind of want to touch on at the tail end, but I can hold off on that. So the setup on this is the Doctor initially traveling alone and dealing at first with sort of saving this ship. There's a bit of timey-wiminess, and he finds himself on the R101. Now, I don't know how well known this particular piece of history is within the UK. I would assume it's probably better known than it is in the US, but speaking as an American, I didn't know what the R101 was. I am going to say what it is. I don't consider this to be a spoiler because actually knowing the historical event of this doesn't make this a worse list. I actually would think it makes it better. I'll explain why in a second. So the R101 was an airship akin to the Hindenburg. Now, it didn't end as quite as spectacularly as the Hindenburg did, but it also didn't end a heck of a lot better than the Hindenburg did. So that's our setup. And when I said I don't think it's much of a spoiler to point that out, because this being a doomed voyage factors into this, because the Doctor shows up and realizes that right off the bat and informs his decisions and some of the things going on. So setting it on this is like setting something on the Titanic. Like, you know what's coming, and you're kind of supposed to. So, but I still like the selection of the R101 as opposed to, say, the Hindenburg, which again, speaking as an American, and I think this is generally true, is the much more universally known, Zeppelin airship disaster. If you think Zeppelin, you either think lead or you think Hindenburg. The R101 was not something I was particularly familiar with. So I rather like that it was a setup that was not necessarily the most cutting edge thing in the world in terms of if you're going to set it in a past disaster scenario. Doctor Who's done it a few times with, Titanic in space, but also with Pompeii, and it's not uncommon with time travel stories in general. But to pick something that is a disaster and is in the history books, but is not one of the big iconic ones that everyone knows, I think is actually kind of a neat balancing trick, because it doesn't feel as tired as something like the Titanic kind of would. Even though I'll probably continue to make comparisons to the Titanic anyway, just because it's a frame of reference that I know. Sue me. So we've got the Doctor. We have the introduction of Charlie, who I guess actually becomes his companion for a while following this. And she is a pretty good character. She gets a decent introduction. When we first meet her, she's actually pretending to be male. She's passing herself off as a cabin boy. That doesn't last for very long. But we don't actually get a ton about her. We get the basics, but the basics that she has are the basics you want for a companion to the Doctor, which is a sense of adventure and the ability to just kind of roll with weirdness when it happens. She's got both of those. So, and on top of that, pretty decent chemistry with Mcgann. So as far as I'm concerned, even though her debut in this didn't make her go, oh, she's an amazing character, it did make me go, that's a solid debut, and you can definitely build some really good stuff off of that. So I don't know what the general opinion on her is, whether she's highly regarded or not, but I would say that this is a strong debut, and there are definitely some very good places that this can be taken. This is a solid foundation for an ongoing companion, so nicely done there. The rest of the supporting cast is pretty good as well. The one I want to particularly highlight, though, is the character of Lord Tamworth, who basically is in charge of the R101. He's the one, giving the orders, making the decisions. He gets the final call over what's going on. And his personality is, again, to make the comparison, sort of that overconfident, over-proper, blustering sort of Englishman that, Captain of the Titanic feel to him, that sort of, oh, well, we must for king and for glory. Well, here we go, and don't worry about that. And, oh, don't bother me with details like we've overloaded the ship. Let's for the king, ha! And so it's got that vibe to it, but at the same time, he's actually afforded a lot more depth and a lot more nuance than you would usually get for a character like that. So when he finds himself in situations that are beyond the scope of his experience and he's dealing with things that he just doesn't have a frame of reference for at all, instead of just sort of going, this is most irregular, which is kind of what you'd expect out of a character who seems to be built like this, he instead adjusts, he listens, he pays attention, he alters his way of doing things. There's more to him than just the bluster, and that was kind of nice and refreshing. I rather enjoyed it. And that whole general vibe, that sort of stiff upper lip-ness, is a thing that is in some of the other supporting cast as well, and I like it. It's the same mentality that, is why the musicians kept playing as the Titanic went down, and I always find that to be a really interesting character trait, and I enjoy it in general. So this was a good supporting cast as well. The alien aspect, and again, I don't consider that to be a spoiler either, because it's Doctor Who. He lands before a historical disaster, and you think, oh, what's going on with this disaster? Oh, right, it's aliens, which is somehow becoming my thing after my Doctor Who episodes in 10 words things. Anyways, the way the aliens work and what's going on with them is interesting, and I'll talk a little bit more about the specifics of that in terms of spoilers. There's actually a couple different things going on. There's something I'll mention, but this happens really early on. There's something called the Vortisaurs, which are sort of time vortex predators. They're kind of pterodactyl-like, and they're sort of fun, a little bit of a campy monster element that factors in at a couple points. But I have to wonder if the concept of them informed some of what went into the Reapers in Father's Day and that Series 1 Christopher Eccleston story. Functionally they're not doing the same thing, but this whole sort of predator that exists in the spaces between time and dimensions thing, I feel like that has to be borrowing from this, at least slightly. Maybe not. I don't know. I haven't talked too much yet about the Doctor himself, about Paul Mcgann, because in some ways he's a little bit of the weak link on that, and I feel really bad saying that. But if I'm being honest, the thing is that I think I went into this having overhyped it in my head, going, this is the first 8th Doctor audio, let's go! And not accounting for the fact that this was the first one for him. And it was his first time playing this character in a long time. Yeah, I think it might have been his first time working in an audio medium. That I'm less certain about. You can tell it's a first outing. And honestly, the worst of it is at the very beginning of the whole thing, which is not a good place to stumble. But it opens, he's not traveling with a companion, so he's talking to himself, and it's some of the most painful, I need to describe what it is I'm seeing so that the listeners understand what's going on, because this is an audio format writing that I've heard in a while, and it's made all the worse because he is talking to himself. So not only is he over-describing things, he's over-describing them for the benefit of just the listener. There isn't even the justification that he's expositing to a companion. And I'm not gonna lie, the opening chunk of this, the opening 5 minutes or so, is really clunky. and really awkward. And Paul Mcgann, he's not bad, he's not off his game, but I feel like he is in. I feel like I'm listening to him in the middle of the process of slipping back into this character, and he's not quite there yet. He's not bad. He's good, but again, the whole thing, it really definitely does feel like this was the first go. This was the pilot episode. This does have that feel to it. So it makes it a bit more rough around the edges, and it makes something that, if I'm honest, I'm unlikely to revisit, mainly because of that. That is my only criticism about it. The only thing that I think doesn't particularly work. And I know that sounds like a major thing. It's like, well, the Doctor doesn't work in Doctor Who. But he does work. Again, I think this is partly an issue of me heaping too many expectations on this thing in the first place. But it is good, and I do recommend checking it out if you haven't already. I am going to get a little bit into spoilers so I can talk about some of the other alien stuff that goes on. So counting down in 3, 2, 1. Why did I count down like that? That was really awkward for my hand. So, the Triskele. There's some interesting things going on with them. The whole idea that they were sort of this one being with, for lack of a better comparison, the sort of jumble of contradictions and emotions that we as humans have, but they split it out into parts to try and distill things and to bring a better sense of order. And they basically create the id, the ego, and the superego. And so you've got the lawgiver being the logical decision maker of everything. You've got the engineer with all the creativity and sort of and that kind of energy, and then you've got the uncreator, who just wants to destroy and is a ball of rage. And what I like about that is that, well, first of all, it reminds me a little bit of the Dark Crystal, in terms of, I guess, spoiler for the Dark Crystal, but you find out at the end that the Skeksis, these evil, vicious creatures, and the peaceful mystics are actually two halves of one species that were split apart. And so it reminded me of that, which is nice. But I like that the Doctor sort of acknowledges, that was an odd approach, but it kind of worked, which I liked, and it feels very alien. It feels like that's an alien solution to a weird problem, and I like that for however long it is that the lawgiver's been around, that it did work until he's getting ready to die, and now we've got a problem. And we have sort of your troublemakers, because you've got the Uncreated Prime on the Triskele side, and then with humans you have Wrathbone. So you've got people on both sides making the situation that honestly isn't even that bad and is relatively peaceful, but throwing it into disarray because of what they want or ways in which they are miscalculating or misjudging the situation. So, the main thing I wanted to say about that is I love the idea of the I almost said split personality, but that people usually use that phrase to mean something else. But the sort of splitting of characteristics, and the breaking apart of this species into component parts, and them each having independent thought, was a nicely alien concept. And I also think it works pretty well in the audio medium, because you just have to shift the nature of the line delivery to very clearly distinguish between the three different parts of the Triskele. So yeah, I think that's it. I did enjoy Storm Warning, but it like I said, I do think in my head I overhyped how good it was going to be to hear Paul Mcgann in audio form, and it's the first go, and I expect that not just expect, I know he does better. I've listened to some of his later audio stuff, so I know that this is not like as good as he was ever going to be. So that'll do it. Storm Warning. Have you heard it? What did you think about it? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments and let's talk about it. There's all the stuff to do, like support me on Patreon, like and subscribe, and follow me on Twitter, send me an email, and so much more. Links for all that stuff and other stuff as well is down in the description. So until next time, this council is adjourned.